Yeah, so you just gave me another thought that okay, it's an oddball thing. We're trying to remember. I think it was a book called "The Best Enemy Money Can Buy," and it's written by the kind of the same class of people as Robert Conquest. Uh, the hardcore conservatives who are in the middle of the height of the Cold War, or who are just absolutely as anti-communist as you can get. And this guy did a very credible job showing all the crackhead things the U.S. government did, assisting the Soviet Union along the way. And perfect example. This is a fun one that most Americans are oblivious to. Uh, do you know that in pure natural terms, if you just looked at geography and terrain and everything else like that, the city of Kabul is geographically isolated from Asia to the north. It actually can't be reached. In the night,
Vaguely kind of know that,
in
but
the
yeah.
1960s, the United States uh, did a massive. I mean, it was just out of this world, huge engineering project that was just beyond. It was considered the absolute most cutting edge everything ever done. We built a road from northern Afghanistan to Kabul.
I did not know that.
Yes, the very road that the Soviets used to come in and take over Afghanistan 20 years later. And nobody has a rational explanation for why this was done. I mean, Afghanistan was always this incredible backwater place. I mean, it had a vague British alignment and a vague Pakistani / Chinese alignment. But other than that, they were essentially, it was a place that was broken up into 8 different major fiefdoms that were constantly jockeying for power. So why would you build a road from northern Afghanistan to Kabul when and the scope of the project was so much? There's something the Soviets could have never done. It would have been completely, if they would have said, "Hey, let's build a road from here to there," probably all their engineers would have said, "Can't be done. We don't have the money to even think of doing something like that." Yet the United States went and did it. So to me, that kind of falls into the whole cabal of enemies idea, where it's like, okay, whoever built it, for whatever reason they built it, wasn't sitting there going, "Huh, let's create a situation where the Soviets come in and we're ending up at war and blah 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 blah." They're just like, "Oh no, let's build a road from Kabul to the Soviet Union, and we're just going to do it because we can, and the money's available, and we've justified it, and somebody thought it was a good idea, and here we go." And it could have been something we were doing to back British interests or something. It could have been something they were thinking in terms of, uh, let's put Afghanistan into a more Soviet orbit than a Chinese orbit. I can't think of a good reason at that time why you would, but somebody had a rationale, and the outcome is horrific. I mean, the United States probably would have never been in Afghanistan if that road hadn't been put in place.
No, I didn't know about that at all. Yeah.
And that probably came under the USAID, the International Aid Organization that the U.S. government runs. They do development in other countries, so that was probably an early version of the U.S. Belt and Road system.
I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
When did this get built?
In the 60s, in the middle of the Vietnam War.
Oh wow! I had no idea. Oh my god. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Like, there's no reason to do this. and it actively hurts everything going forward. Cabal of enemies, sure.
Yeah. Oh,
I
and
mean, we're pulling a lot of government examples.
yeah, there's I'm sure private organizations, but I mean government does bureaucracy so well, and so
Yeah, I mean, they're the easiest people to point out. Yeah, this is awful.
okay.
Um,
And I think you could do some really easy, good arguments. Actually, it's probably almost too easy of a target. The State Department, where essentially where they got locked into this mindset of we've got to dismantle the Soviet Union. And okay, they're no longer the Soviet Union, but we're going to still keep dismantling them, and we're going to push forward. And even though early 1990s, a window opens up where it's like, hey, Russia says, hey, we want to be a joint partner with you guys. We see the way things are going. No sense in being adversaries anymore. We'll just sit across the table from each other as equal partners and work all this out. And the State Department's like, oh, no, we don't partner. We take on junior partners, which means you listen to us, but we don't do the back and forth thing. You follow, but you don't collaborate. And so they went about disassembling the old Soviet Union, and wow, here we are in Ukraine.
yeah,
So I think that might be a good example of a cabal of enemies. That they no intentions involved, but you got people who, I mean, essentially taking us as we're probably closer to nuclear war than when I was a kid. Expecting to see mushroom clouds before I was an adult, and yeah, it's and the people doing it are incapable of seeing how close they're taking things.
yeah, yeah. There's, oof, yeah. Well, that got dark. This happens a lot with us. We're like, oh yeah, remember how that's all going very poorly. Yeah, the State Department is it's the worst. It's just the worst. Domestically and in foreign affairs, it's just awful everywhere.
Yeah. Um,
My exchange students program is run through the State Department.
yeah.
It's awful. They're a bunch of incompetent boobies. They one of the kids again, like, what would your mission be if you were an exchange student program? You'd want, the kids coming to America to be with, really great families that are, okay, one of the kids, not in Colorado Springs, but a different part of America, was placed in the home of a family where their one of their children died last year. The husband just got out of prison for murder
Awesome.
about 6 or 8 months ago. And as a result of the problems with both of those issues, the mother has had a severe chemical dependency problem that is continuing right now.
Okay. So, I guess they want more real America as opposed to an idealized America.
I mean, but you would think, the mission would be to bring kids here so that they could have the most positive American experience possible, even if it's, not the typical one.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the nature of bureaucracy. So they have this person they have to place. And if your mission was, as you said, the idea of let's show how, what a cool place America is and what kind of people Americans are, you get to a certain point where you say, geez, we don't have a good place to place this person. So let's just not. We'll just say, hey, sorry,
Yeah.
we don't have any host families, etc., etc. But that's not how bureaucracies work. They're like, oh my God, if we don't place this person, that budget line will be gone next year. So we got to expend it under any circumstance. We've got to make it happen. Because, if we're placing 14,000 people every year, this year we end up doing 13,999. That's what's going to happen. We're going to be stuck at 13,999 forever. And who knows, the next time, if we use that kind of logic where just because they're being put into a dangerous environment, we don't send them there, it'll end up being 13,998. And, it's just going to keep going in that direction. So, forward. Yeah, no, we had a similar situation when we were living out the boonies here in Missouri. It's like the tiny town of, I mean, it's the stereotypical tiny town in a well, not deep south, but mid south. And so,
deep enough.
Yeah. So bringing in an Islamic girl from Yemen. Oh boy, that was lots of fun because like the first family they tried to place her with said, "Oh no, she's gonna cut off her heads or something, so we don't want her here." And so yeah, it was a real cool person. We got to meet her, and because we were doing the homeschool thing at the time, we had her come over and tell us everything about her home country and culture and all that stuff, and it was really cool. Learned a lot. Very nice person, but it's like, boy, did you put her into a rough situation. I mean, yeah, and so yeah, there's no thought process in it all. They're doing the bureaucratic thing, defend the budget line. And okay, so take it to Robert Conquest's way of thinking. So if your goal is to try to show an ideal American and an ideal American family, and you place a student in this situation that sounds actually dangerous, you're actually being an enemy to your own cause at that point. Not intentionally. Yeah. It's not your goal, but you're just like, okay, anything to protect the budget line. So maybe I think we're starting to see the process here.
Yeah. It's again, a direct government example, and definitely a State Department example for my case. But yeah, it seems that there is little thought that goes into actually doing what you would expect them to do. Now, maybe that's not what they want. Maybe if I read through their charter, we're like, we'll just throw you with anybody. But I bet if it's supposed to be the State Department, there's supposed to be some diplomacy in it.
Mm-hmm.
We want to send these kids back thinking, yay, America, right?
Yeah.
I would guess.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, our exchange student, yes, she has a very yay America attitude. A couple of the other kids, yes, but this is not the experience for everybody.
Yeah. Okay, so a little, still close to the government, but a little further away, the Republican Party would be a good example of, because they did not have a explicit right-wing stance. They essentially got infiltrated by and taken over by progressives in the 30s and 40s. And then once it was all over, even though they still had at the time they wouldn't have been called conservatives, but they would be what we call, they would have been called paleocons. For our reference would be paleocons. So you had a party full of paleocons, but it was dominated not by numbers, but by positions, by Republican progressives. And that drove the party for the longest time. So you'd constantly always hear, because you ended up in their circles from time to time where it's like, hey, come and help us out. We'll take over the XYZ committee, and we'll be running the Republican Party the way we want to any second now. And yeah, you might be able to pull it off, but the moment you did it, it would be it'd be like an immune system response. The whole party would just swarm out and push you out, and you wouldn't, you'd be lucky if you were able to do anything for 6 months before somebody figured out and pushed you out. And it was the progressive wing of the Republican Party that was controlling all the levers. Uh, so I think that's a really good example of uh, both second and third law in place. One is second law being is there was no explicit right wing bias to the party. It was just like, hey, if you're not a Democrat, you show up here. It doesn't matter what you believe, doesn't matter what your philosophy is, doesn't matter what it is you're actually fighting for or against. As long as you're not one of them, you're one of us. And that ends up pushing them in a left wing direction. And I could think of a lot of elections where looking at the Republicans, if one were conservative, you would look at it and say, that's not only not conservative, it seems like the enemies of conservatism are actually running things.